Welcome back, my family. Today, I need to warn you, these hospital stories are extremely graphic. So if you're faint of heart, this isn't for you. But if you're still here, it's time to get extremely uncomfortable. Before we start, please subscribe and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, close your eyes, allow the fear to consume you, and dive into some of the most disturbing true stories from healthcare workers. Every hospital has stories the staff trade in hushed voices, the kind they don't write down in charts or share with new hires on their first day. In my hospital, there was one story that almost everyone knew. They called him Bob. It was a night shift, the kind where the halls were dim, the machines hummed quietly, and the building felt more like a sleeping giant than a place full of people. I was charting at the nurse's station when I noticed a man in white nursing scrubs walk past the double doors at the far end. At first, I thought nothing of it. Night shifts always had staff moving in and out of rooms. He looked like any other nurse, tall, clean-cut, walking with purpose. He pushed through the swinging doors and entered a patient room. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I realized I hadn't seen him come back out. Curious, I got up and headed down the hall. The room he had gone into was dark. The blinds were shut, the bed neatly made, untouched. No patient was assigned there. It was one of our empty rooms. I checked the bathroom, the closet. Nothing. I stepped back into the hall, scanning both directions. No one was there. The only sound was the faint ticking of a wall clock and the low buzz of a light fixture. I returned to the nurse's station and asked the others, "Hey, who's covering in white scrubs tonight?" They all froze. One nurse looked at me, eyes wide. "You saw him too?" That's when they told me the story. Years ago, there was a nurse named Bob. He worked nights like us, dressed in crisp white scrubs back when that was the standard. He was well-liked at first, always smiling, always willing to pick up extra shifts. But then rumors started spreading. Families whispered complaints. Staff noticed odd behavior. The truth eventually came out. Bob had been accused of child molestation. The investigation was brutal, and the shame followed him everywhere in the hospital. He stopped smiling, stopped talking much, and became a shadow of the man people thought they knew. One night, he walked into an empty patient room, climbed up to the window, and jumped. He didn't survive. The room was sealed for a while, but eventually reopened after a fresh coat of paint and a new bed. But the staff swore he never left. Since then, people claim to see him wandering the halls. Always the same details. White scrubs, silent walk, slipping into empty rooms and never coming back out. Some saw him through the corner of their eyes. Others saw him head on like I had. The description never changed. One CNA told me she saw him leaning over a bed once, checking in 4 line that wasn't really there. When she called out to him, he turned his head, but his face was blurry, like a smudge on glass. Then he vanished. Another nurse said she had been making rounds when she saw him sitting in a chair by the window of the very room where he had ended his life. She thought it was a visitor at first, until she realized the visitor had no shadow. When she blinked, the chair was empty. The staff didn't joke about it. They didn't laugh. They talked about him the same way they talked about codes or bed shortages, like a fact of life in the hospital. I try to brush it off as stress. Long hours, little sleep, minds playing tricks in the low light. But once you hear the story, you can't unsee it. Every time I passed that hallway, I felt a weight on my shoulders like someone was watching. The air seemed colder there, heavier. One night, a call light went off in that exact empty room. I grabbed the chart to confirm. No one assigned. Still, the panel blinked insistently. I walked down the hall, pushed open the door, and found the room dark and still. But on the bed, the blanket was folded back, like someone had just gotten up. I stood there in the silence, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then the light above the bed clicked off by itself. I didn't bother reporting it. I knew maintenance would say the same thing they always did. No fault found. Over the years, new staff kept reporting the same thing. A man in white scrubs, silent, walking the halls, slipping into rooms. Always the same area. Always the same ending. Gone without a trace. I've seen patients glance toward that doorway too, eyes widening, whispering, "Who's that man?" when no one was there. One patient even described him exactly. Tall, white scrubs, pale face. She asked, "Is he one of the night nurses?" I didn't have the heart to tell her no. Some say Bob lingers out of guilt, doomed to pace the hospital forever. Others think he's stuck in the last moments of his life, replaying the walk to that room, entering it over and over, but never leaving. For me, it doesn't matter why. What matters is that I saw him once, clear as day, walking with purpose into a room he had no business in. And when I followed, he was gone. Hospitals are places of healing, but they're also places of endings. Some endings are peaceful, some tragic, and some, like Bob's, leave behind echoes too strong to fade. So if you ever find yourself working the night shift in a quiet hospital and you see a tall man in white scrubs slip silently into a room, don't bother chasing him. Don't bother calling out, because you won't find anyone there. Some hospital stories spread slowly, like rumors carried from bed to bed. They don't appear in reports, and doctors don't write them down. But patients whisper them, families repeat them, and nurses glance at each other nervously when the topic comes up. That's how I first heard about her, the nurse who came at night with sweet medicine. It started with a young man recovering from facial surgery. His jaw was wired, his face stitched and swollen, making it hard for him to eat or talk. He was on pain medication and antibiotics, and the staff had him on a strict schedule. But after a few nights, he told us something unusual. "There's a nurse who comes in," he said softly through clenched teeth. "She gives me something, a sweet medicine. It makes me feel warm." We checked his chart. No one had given him any extra medication. His nurses were accounted for, and none of them matched the description he gave. A beautiful woman, soft voice, warm hands, always checking him with a stethoscope that didn't feel cold. At first, we thought it was the drugs making him dream. Surgery patients often confuse reality and nightmares. But the way he described her was so detailed. She wore an old-fashioned nurse's uniform. Her hair was tucked neatly under her cap, and she always appeared between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. The patient said she'd sit at his bedside, whisper something soothing, then tip a small glass to his lips. It tasted sweet, he insisted, not like the bitter pills you give me. By the end of the week, the man's condition had started to change. Instead of improving, he was wasting away. He refused food, even the soft broth we fed him. He spat out his prescribed medicine, saying, "I don't need it. She already gave me what I need." His weight dropped frighteningly fast. He grew pale, his eyes sunken. Yet at night, he smiled, whispering about her visits. She came again, he told us. She said she's taking care of me now. The nurses exchanged uneasy looks. None of us admitted it out loud, but we all knew this wasn't a simple hallucination. Too many patients over the years had spoken of her, the sweet medicine nurse who appeared at night, who only the sickest seemed to see. The staff tried to intervene. One nurse stayed in his room all night, determined to prove it was just in his head. She swore she never fell asleep, never looked away from him. But in the morning, the patient told us calmly, "She came. You didn't see her, but she was here." The nurse who stayed looked shaken. "He was staring at the corner all night," she admitted, like he was talking to someone. "I didn't hear anything, but he was smiling." The man's family grew desperate. His mother begged the doctors, something is wrong. He was getting better. Now he's slipping away. The doctors blamed depression, medication refusal, stress. but the nurses whispered about her. Finally, the family called in a priest. When he entered the room, the patient grew restless. "She won't like him here," he said nervously. "She doesn't want him here." The priest sprinkled holy water and prayed over the bed. For the first time in weeks, the patient shouted, thrashing in pain. He clutched his head and screamed, "She's angry. She's angry at me." And then silence. The patient collapsed back onto the bed, trembling. His heart monitor spiked, then slowly returned to normal. He whispered hoarsely, "She's gone." After that night, he stopped talking about the sweet nurse. He ate again, reluctantly at first, then with more strength. His weight returned little by little. Within a month, he was walking the halls, still scarred from his surgery, but alive. But the story didn't end there. On his final day before discharge, one of the night nurses had to fetch some paperwork from a storage office down the hall. She swore later that when she pushed the door open, she saw her. A woman in an old white uniform sat at the desk, hands folded neatly, watching her with cold, dark eyes. The nurse blinked, and the chair was empty. When the patient was wheeled past that same office on his way out, he turned his head sharply, his face pale. "She's there," he whispered. "I saw her. She's waiting." Since then, others have reported her. Patients described the same things. The warm stethoscope, the sweet medicine, the comfort that feels too good to be real. Nurses sometimes feel watched in the halls at night, as if someone else is making rounds with them. No one knows who she was. Some think she was a real nurse decades ago, someone who gave morphine a little too generously, who comforted patients right up until their last breath. Others believe she isn't human at all, that she only appears to those close to death, luring them away with her sweet-tasting medicine. Whatever the truth, I know this, patients keep seeing her. They describe her the same way, every time, and she never comes during the day. Only at night, only when the halls are quiet, only when the patient is weakest. And when she comes, she always says the same thing, whispered softly in their ear. "Don't worry, I'll take care of you." The hospital parking lot was my quiet place. After long shifts on the geriatric ward, I'd sit in my car with the seat leaned back and the windows cracked open, just letting the night air wash away the smell of antiseptic and latex gloves. Sometimes I'd close my eyes for 10 minutes before driving home, the hum of streetlights and the distant rush of cars lulling me into half sleep. That's where it happened, the dream that felt too real to ever forget. It was around 3 a.m. on a summer night. The air outside was warm, but inside my car, the vinyl seats were cool against my arms. I remember tilting my head back, breathing deep, and letting exhaustion pull me down. I didn't mean to sleep, but the weight of the shift finally dragged me under. In the dream, I was still sitting in my car. Everything looked exactly the same. The faint glow of the dashboard, the yellow pool of light from the nearest lamppost. Except there was movement outside my window. When I turned, I saw Annie. Annie was one of my patients, a frail woman with thinning white hair and sad eyes that always searched for someone who wasn't there. She had dementia and spent most days asking about her daughter. "Where is she?" Annie would ask, clutching my hand, her voice trembling. She promised she'd come back. In the dream, Annie was standing just outside my car. She wore her thin nightgown, the one patterned with faded pink roses. Her bare feet were pale against the asphalt. She leaned down, pressing her face against the glass, her hands flat on the window. "Have you seen my daughter?" she asked, her voice muffled through the glass, but crystal clear in my mind. I froze, heart pounding. Her eyes were wide, frantic, darting left and right, as though she was searching the dark corners of the lot. Then she began pounding on the glass. The car shook with each blow. "Where is she? Where is she?" I tried to move, tried to unlock the door, but my body wouldn't respond. My arms felt pinned, my chest heavy. I realized with horror that I couldn't move at all. Sleep paralysis. Annie kept pounding, her face twisted in desperation. Her breath fogged the glass. Please, please help me find her. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. All I could do was stare as her thin hands slapped against the window over and over. The sound was deafening. Then, suddenly, everything went silent. Her hands slid down the glass, leaving streaks. She looked at me one last time, eyes hollow, lips trembling, and whispered, "She's gone." The next second, she vanished. I jolted awake in the car, gasping for breath. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The parking lot was empty, the air still, but the echo of her pounding on the glass still rang in my ears. I tried to shake it off as a nightmare born from exhaustion. I splashed cold water on my face, drove home, and told myself it was just my brain replaying Annie's constant pleas for her daughter. But when I came back to the ward later that morning, the charge nurse pulled me aside. Her voice was low, heavy. "Annie passed away last night." The room seemed to tilt around me. "What time?" I asked. She glanced at the chart. Around 3 a.m. That was the exact time I'd been in the parking lot, trapped in that dream, watching Annie beg at my car window. The staff tried to comfort me. It was coincidence, they said. You cared for her so much that your mind just connected the dots. Maybe that was true, but part of me can't forget the way her voice sounded in that dream. Too sharp, too desperate to be imagined. It wasn't like my usual dreams. Everything had felt real. The texture of the glass under my fingertips, the smell of asphalt, the vibration of her pounding fists. I didn't wake up refreshed. I woke up drained, as if I had really been there with her. For days after, I avoided the parking lot. I parked closer to the entrance, under brighter lights, with other cars nearby. But sometimes when I sat in my car too long, I swore I heard the faint tapping of hands on the window, just on the edge of hearing. I don't know what to believe. Maybe it was my brain creating a bridge between exhaustion and grief. Or maybe Annie's spirit really came looking for me one last time, still searching for her daughter, even as she slipped away. What I do know is this. I've worked with plenty of dementia patients, and they all ask for loved ones at some point. But Annie's plea felt different, heavier. It didn't stop at the edge of life. It followed me into my sleep, into that silent parking lot, where she begged me one last time to help her find someone she would never see again. Now, whenever I close my eyes in my car after a shift, I keep them half open, just in case. Because I don't think I could handle seeing another patient's face pressed against the glass, whispering for help I can't give. Hospice care has its own rhythm. The lights are softer, the hall's quieter, and the conversation slower. You stop rushing like you do in the ER. Instead, you sit, you listen, and you learn to wait. You also learn that the last days of life don't always follow the rules of medicine. Some things can't be charted, but they still happen right in front of you. One of my patients was Mrs. Robinson, an elderly woman with thinning gray hair and a fragile frame. She had been brought in because her family couldn't manage her pain at home anymore. The first time I walked into her room, she gave me a tired smile and asked if I could find her dog. I thought she was confused. "What dog, Mrs. Robinson?" "The little brown one," she said, her eyes drifting toward the corner of the room. "He's sitting right there by the dresser. Don't you see him?" Of course, there was nothing there. Just a stack of folded blankets and a vase of flowers. But her face lit up, and she made a kissing noise like you'd use to call a pet. Her hands trembled as she reached toward empty air. Later, her daughter told me that Mrs. Robinson had once owned a small terrier named Buddy. He died over 20 years earlier. That wasn't the only strange thing. One afternoon, as I was adjusting her medication pump, she suddenly sat upright and began speaking Spanish. Her voice was low and steady. the words flowing as if she'd spoken them her whole life. But her family swore she didn't know a single word of Spanish. I stepped back, stunned, listening to her mutter phrases I couldn't understand. Her eyes were open but glassy, focused on something far away. I called her daughter into the room. She froze when she heard her mother's voice. She never spoke like this, the daughter whispered. Later, when we repeated some of the words to a bilingual nurse, she translated them. Where are my children? I need my children. From then on, things only grew stranger. Mrs. Robinson would spend hours staring at empty chairs, nodding slowly as though listening to someone speak. Sometimes she'd smile faintly. Other times, her lips would press into a hard line and tears would spill down her cheeks. When I asked her who she was talking to, she said, "My babies. They're waiting for me." Her children were grown adults, alive, and sitting by her bedside every day, but she wasn't looking at them. She was looking at something they couldn't see. One evening, the family stepped out for dinner, leaving me alone with her. The room was dim, only a small lamp glowing by the bed. The air was warm, but I felt a shiver run through me. Mrs. Robinson suddenly turned her head sharply and whispered, "Do you hear it?" "Hear what?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "He's scratching at the door. Buddy wants to come in." A moment later, I swore I heard it too. A faint scratching sound near the door. Just 3 little scrapes, then silence. I opened the door quickly, heart racing, but the hallway was empty. When I turned back, Mrs. Robinson was laughing softly, her eyes fixed on the foot of her bed. "There you are," she said sweetly. "Good boy." Her hand stroked the blanket as if petting a small dog curled at her feet. But nothing was there. By the final week, her visions became constant. She would reach upward, her frail arms trembling, whispering names we couldn't recognize. She spoke to her mother, long dead, as though she were standing right beside her. Sometimes she sang quietly, words half forgotten but still carrying a melody. One night, she looked at me directly, her gaze sharper than it had been in days. "Don't be afraid when they come for you," she said. "They're kind." I didn't know how to answer. My throat was dry, my skin prickling. I forced a nod, pretending to understand. Her last day came quietly. The family gathered around her bed, holding her hands. She drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes smiling, sometimes murmuring in Spanish again. At one point, she lifted her arms, eyes wide with wonder. "They're here," she whispered. "All of them." Her breathing slowed. The family leaned closer, tears running down their faces. She let out one last breath and went still. We talk a lot in medicine about hallucinations, about confusion caused by low oxygen or medications. But sitting there, watching Mrs. Robinson reach for something no one else could see, I wasn't so sure. She looked too certain, too calm. It's a pattern I've seen many times since. Patients seeing family who've long since died, talking to pets who once curled at their feet, speaking languages they never learned in life, calling names no one else recognizes. Some people say they're just dreams brought on by a failing brain. Others say they're visions, glimpses of whoever waits to guide us out of this world. All I know is that Mrs. Robinson died smiling, her hand stroking an invisible terrier on her blanket. And when her daughter asked me afterward, "Do you think she really saw him?" I didn't know how to answer. Maybe the better question is, what if she did? Nursing homes never sleep. Even at 2 in the morning, when most residents are tucked in bed and the building is dim and still, there's always some sound breaking the quiet. An oxygen machine sighing, a cough from a hallway, the faint squeak of rubber saws on linoleum. That's the setting where this story lives. The long nights when the world outside forgets about you, but the walls inside hold on to everything. I was working a double shift with another nurse. We knew each other well, and on nights like this, We'd trade stories at the desk between rounds just to keep our eyes open. The elderly home wasn't big, 2 wings, about 40 residents total, but the building was old. Floorboards creaked even though there weren't any wood floors. Doors clicked as though someone were testing the handles. And the worst room of all was the one at the far end, the death room. That's what staff called it. Officially, it was where we stored bodies temporarily until the funeral home came. It was locked, it was clean, and it was nothing unusual, just a space with a gurney, a sheet, and cool air. But everyone hated passing it at night. On this particular shift, we had just finished rounds and were heading back to the nurse's station when we heard something faint. Hello. The voice was soft, floating down the hallway. We stopped, glancing at each other. It came again, clearer this time. Hello. It wasn't one of our residents. Their voices were shaky, older, worn with time. This sounded different. Neutral, calm, almost like a recording. I walked a few steps forward. Who's there? No answer. The hall stretched long and silent. Doors were closed, lights dimmed. Residents were asleep, their rooms checked only minutes ago. We shook it off as maybe a TV left on somewhere, though it hadn't sounded electronic. But then it happened again, this time right behind us. Hello. The voice was right at our backs. We spun around, flashlights slicing the dark. No one, just the hallway, empty, quiet. We returned to the station, trying to laugh it off. But neither of us really laughed. Later that night, I was restocking linens when I felt something cold brush against my shoulder. It was firm like the weight of a hand. I whipped around, expecting to see my partner behind me. No one was there. The shelves rattled faintly, as if someone had just walked past. My skin crawled. I grabbed the sheets and left faster than I'd like to admit. Back at the desk, before I could even tell her what had happened, my coworker leaned in with wide eyes. "You're not going to believe this," she whispered. Something touched me in the hall. We stared at each other, goosebumps prickling both our arms. Around 3 a.m., the worst moment of the night came. The death room door was supposed to stay shut. Locked. It always was. But as we did rounds, we noticed it was cracked open, just a sliver. We froze. Neither of us had touched it. No one else had access. As we stood there, staring at that narrow black gap, a sound drifted out. A voice. Low, drawn out, calling a name. Not mine. Not hers. A resident's name. We turned and hurried down the hall, checking that resident's room. She was asleep, breathing slow, her chest rising and falling under the glow of a nightlight. Perfectly fine. But back down the hall, the door to the death room creaked open wider. I don't know what possessed us to do it, but we walked closer, side by side. The smell was faint, cold air mixed with something metallic like old blood. We stood just outside the door. Inside, the room was pitch dark. Then the voice came again, longer this time, dragging out another resident's name. We bolted. Neither of us spoke until we were back at the station, lights blazing. She whispered, "It knows them. It knows their names." The rest of the night dragged. Every creak made us jump. Every shadow seemed too dark. But the strangest part came at dawn. When families arrived and the morning staff came in, everything went back to normal. The halls felt lighter, the air less heavy. Even the death room door was shut and locked again, just as it should be. The resident whose name we heard that night, she passed away 2 days later, peacefully in her sleep. And the second resident, gone a week after. Both of them had been called by name before they died. I don't know what lingers in nursing homes at night. Maybe it's the weight of all the lives that ended inside those walls. Maybe it's the spirits of the ones who aren't ready to leave. Or maybe it's something darker, something that waits in the silence and calls to the living. All I know is this. When a voice says hello in a place where everyone is supposed to be asleep, you don't answer. And if the death room door opens on its own, you don't look inside. Because sometimes the night shift isn't just about caring for the living. It's about remembering you're never the only ones awake. Psych wards for children don't look like the ones you see in movies. They're painted in bright colors, with posters of superheroes on the walls and bookshelves stacked with toys. The air smells like crayons and hand sanitizer. On the surface, it feels safe, almost cheerful. But underneath, you know why the doors are locked, why the windows are shatterproof, and why every drawer hides sharp objects behind key. That's where I met him. A boy who was only 7 years old, and already the most frightening patient I've ever seen. He came in with his mother, who looked exhausted and terrified at the same time. She kept wringing her hands, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. When she spoke to intake, her voice shook. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "He's going to kill me." We all exchanged uneasy glances. Parents exaggerate sometimes, but there was no exaggeration in her voice. The boy sat calmly in the chair, swinging his legs. His face was pale, his hair neatly combed, his hands folded in his lap. He looked like any other child, until you noticed his eyes. Cold, flat, watching everything, but showing nothing back. When the nurse knelt down and smiled at him, asking his name, he smiled too. But it wasn't the shy grin of a kid meeting strangers. It was slow, deliberate, a smile that didn't touch his eyes. During intake, we learned more. He had been mutilating animals in secret. The mother had found the family cat in the shed, cut open with knives. Rabbits and birds in the neighborhood had disappeared, only to be discovered later in her backyard, buried shallowly. When she confronted him, he just stared at her and said, "It doesn't matter. They don't feel anything." He had been hiding knives under his bed, more than 50 of them. Kitchen knives, pocket knives, sharpened sticks. Anything with an edge. When asked why, he said matter-of-factly, "For when I need them." The mother confessed she hadn't slept in weeks. She would wake up at night to find him standing silently by her bed, just staring. She'd beg him to go back to sleep, but he never spoke. Just stood there, unblinking, until she broke down and dragged him out. On the ward, we try to treat him like every other kid. Structured activities, art therapy, group games. He played along, but it was clear he was only copying the other children. He never laughed, never showed frustration, never asked questions. One day, during art therapy, he drew a picture of his mother. She was lying in bed, her eyes wide, a red line drawn across her neck. When a therapist asked him about it, he shrugged. "That's what's going to happen," he said simply. No fear, no shame, just a flat statement, like describing the weather. We rotated staff when supervising him because no one liked being alone with him. He never raised his voice or caused chaos like the other kids. Instead, he sat quietly, watching, always watching. Once, when I was on observation, I asked him why he hurt animals. He tilted his head and looked at me with that blank stare. Then the slow smile crept back. "Because I wanted to see inside," he said. I pressed. "And what about your mom? Why do you scare her?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because she's weak." That one word sent a chill down my spine. The other children avoided him. Even kids with severe anger problems, kids who fought daily, gave him space. During playtime, they would circle away from him, whispering nervously when they thought staff couldn't hear. Children sense things adults try to explain away. They sense something in him too. He never cried. Not once. Not when his mother left after visits. Not when he was scolded. Not when privileges were taken away. No sadness. No guilt. Just that eerie calm, like nothing mattered. The scariest moment came one night during bed checks. The children's rooms had large windows in the doors, so staff could peek in without disturbing them. Most kids tossed and turned, muttering in their sleep. But when I stopped at his room, he wasn't asleep. He was sitting upright on the bed, staring straight at the window, straight at me. His face was blank, his hands resting neatly on his knees. I jumped slightly, caught off guard. I hadn't expected eye contact in the middle of the night. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. I forced a smile, tapped the glass softly, and mouthed, "Go to sleep." His lips curved into that same slow smile, teeth glinting faintly in the dim light. I walked away quickly, but the image followed me the rest of the night. Over the next weeks, doctors tested him, questioned him, tried to measure his mind against charts and scales. The results were chilling. He showed no empathy, no remorse, no understanding of why his actions were wrong. When asked if he wanted to hurt people, he said yes. When asked why, he said, "Because I can." At 7 years old, his answers sounded like those of an adult killer. Cold, direct, empty. His mother visited less and less. When she did come, she sat far from him, trembling. He would smile at her the whole time, never breaking eye contact. The staff had to end one visit early when she broke down sobbing, begging him to please be normal. He just tilted his head, watching her like she was an insect under glass. Eventually, the doctors moved him to a specialized facility for children with extreme behavioral disorders. The day he left, he turned to us and said cheerfully, "I'll come back. Don't worry." It didn't sound like a promise. It sounded like a threat. I've worked in psych for years, and I've seen children hurt, traumatized, broken by abuse or tragedy. Most of them can heal with time and love. But this boy was different. He wasn't broken. He wasn't confused. He was hollow. Sometimes at night, I think about his mother lying in bed, waking up to see those small eyes watching her in the dark. I think about the knives under the mattress, the animals in the shed, the picture with the red line across her neck. And I wonder, what kind of man will he grow into? Because monsters aren't always born in shadows. Sometimes they're sitting in brightly painted wards, swinging their legs like any other child, smiling at you with eyes that never feel human. You can tell when a room is almost out of time. The air gets still like the building is holding its breath. The clock gets louder. Even the curtains seem to stop moving. That's the kind of room I walked into on a quiet Sunday afternoon, pushing my little CNA supply cart, thinking it would be a normal check. It wasn't. I was on the hospice wing for West, the one with the big windows that look over the parking lot. Sundays are slow there. Most rooms are dim. TVs murmur old game shows. Families come and go between church and dinner. That day, our unit was extra calm. Several rooms were empty, and the others had sleeping patients. The charge nurse joked that even the alarms were taking a nap. My patient near the end of the hall was fading. She'd been breathing in soft, shallow waves all morning. The nurse had told me, "Eyes on that room. Comfort care only." So I made that my loop. Vital signs not needed, just mouth swabs, fresh sheets, gentle hands. When I reached her door, I paused. Visitors. Inside, the room was full, a whole family standing around the bed. They were quiet, not crowding, just present. And they were well dressed, like they had come from church or a wedding. Men in dark suits, shoes shining. Women in neat dresses, pearls, hair pinned back. A boy with slicked hair held a hat at his chest. A woman my grandmother's age wore lilac gloves. It felt like a picture from another time. I smiled and whispered, "Hi there. I'm just going to come around to help her turn and moisten her mouth." They all looked at me kindly. One of the men stepped aside, giving me space. No one talked much. I caught a soft thank you from somewhere near the window, but I couldn't tell who said it. The air smelled faintly of old perfume and starch, the kind you notice at holiday services. I checked the patient. Her skin was cool, her forehead damp. I turned her a little to the left, slid a new pad beneath, and brushed the swab along her lips. Her breathing was the same, slow, careful. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 2:41 p.m. The family stayed so still. Not stiff, just settled. Calm. Their eyes never left her face. When I stepped back to the sink to rinse the cup, the oldest woman in the lilac gloves gave me a gentle nod. It felt like permission. I tucked the blanket, lowered the lights, and whispered that I'd be right back with a fresh, warm washcloth. They nodded again. The room was so peaceful, I didn't want to break it. In the hall, I noticed how empty the unit was. Room 418, dark. 420, dark. 422, dark. At the far end, a TV flickered to an empty chair. No other visitors. Just the quiet buzz of the lights and the soft squeak of my cart. I ran the washcloth under warm water, wrung it out, and went back in. The family hadn't moved. Same places, same soft faces, same calm gaze. I wiped my patient's hands, one then the other, and smoothed her hair. The woman in lilac gloves watched with shining eyes. I thought, what a loving family. I checked the clock again, 2:47 p.m. I placed the call bell back, though I knew no one would touch it. I whispered that I'd be just outside at the desk if they needed anything. A man near the foot of the bed gave another tiny nod. No one tried to stop me. No one asked questions. It felt like they already knew what was happening and didn't need my words. At the desk, I told the nurse, they've got a lot of family in there. Very formal. Might have come straight from church. She looked up, puzzled. Family? I just spoke to them. They said they're waiting for the okay to go in. I blinked. They're already in there. The room's full. She tilted her head. The daughter and son are in the waiting room. Hoodies, jeans. Been there all morning. I opened my mouth, closed it. Maybe more came while I was in there. She shrugged. I didn't buzz anyone. Doors stayed locked. On our unit, visitors press a silver plate, and we buzz them through. We write down names. We hadn't buzzed anyone in for a while. I felt heat rise in my face, like I'd missed something obvious. I'll go check again, I said, trying to sound normal. When I stepped back into the room, my patient took a long, thin breath and let it go. Another, then a pause. I watched her chest. The line of her jaw softened. 2:56 p.m. The family leaned in just a little, the way people do when they're waiting for a whisper. I stood by the bed and took my patient's hand. Her fingers were cool, her pulse flutter-light. One more breath. A small sigh I felt more than heard. Then nothing. I checked the carotid gently. Stillness. I watched the rise and fall that didn't come. I kept my hand there a moment longer because hearts can surprise you. This one didn't. I looked at the clock again. 2:58 p.m. I whispered to the room, I think she's gone. The family didn't cry out. No one collapsed. They didn't need to. A quiet change passed through them, like a tide pulling back. The woman in lilac gloves pressed 2 fingers to her lips, then to the air above the patient's forehead. A man smoothed the blanket once. The boy with the hat bowed his head. I lowered the bed, straightened the sheet, and dimmed the light a little more. When I turned to tell them I would step out to get the nurse, the space near the window seemed brighter. The shapes of their shoulders looked softer, like fog at sunrise. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks in the dim. I stepped into the hall to call the time. The nurse came at once. We did what we always do, gently and with respect. She listened. I watched the second hand sweep past 3 p.m. She said the words, time of death, 3 p.m. When we finished the first part of postmortem care and it was time to tell the family, I took a breath. I already pictured them, the suits, the dresses, the lilac gloves, crying quietly by the bed. I wanted to speak softly and not startle anyone. But when we turned back toward the room, it was empty. Empty of people, I mean. The bed was there. My patient lay peaceful under the sheet. The chairs were neatly in place. No scent of perfume. No scuff on the floor where shiny shoes had stood. No hat by the window. The room felt lighter. The nurse touched my arm. Ready, she said, nodding toward the waiting room. I swallowed and followed her. Down the hall, the waiting room held two people, a daughter and a son, just like the nurse said. They wore regular clothes, a gray hoodie, a faded team t-shirt, sneakers. Their faces were tired and scared. The daughter gripped a foil pan of baked ziti someone had dropped off. The son twisted a baseball cap in his hands. They stood when they saw us. I heard my own voice say gently, "She passed at 3 o'clock." The daughter began to cry, quiet at first, then shaking. The son wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Can we see her?" he asked. "Of course," the nurse said. "Come with us." We walked them down the hall. I held the door. They stepped in, holding hands. The daughter set the pan down on the chair and put her palm to the sheet, right over her mother's heart. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. "We're here." The son bowed his head. "We were waiting like you told us," he said to me without looking up. We didn't want to crowd the room. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. My brain was trying to stack two pictures on top of each other. The formal crowd, still and calm. That was one picture. This new one, the worn hoodie, the red-rimmed eyes, the foil pan sweating on the chair. That was the other. They wouldn't line up. The nurse squeezed my elbow. "I'll give them a minute," she whispered, and I stepped into the hall. I followed because I suddenly needed air. Who was in there before? I asked as soon as the door clicked shut. She frowned. "No one. We haven't let anyone in yet." "I saw them," I said. I heard myself talking too fast. A whole family. Suits, dresses. I worked around them twice. They moved for me. They thanked me. The room was full. She looked at me for a long moment, not like I was crazy, but like she was deciding how careful to be. "You know the sign in," she said softly. No one came through, and the unit's been empty all afternoon. I turned and stared down the hallway. Door after door, most of them dark. No other visitors. No voices. No footsteps. Just the slow tick of the clock at the end of 4 West. I checked the logbook at the desk. 2 names, the daughter and the son, signed at 10:12 a.m. No one else. I walked back to the room one more time. The daughter was smoothing the sheet, telling little stories under her breath about a recipe, a neighbor, a dog that used to sleep at the foot of the bed. The son had set his cap down and was rubbing his eyes. I looked at the chairs around them. I could still see where the well-dressed people had stood and the spaces they left. One by the window, one at the foot, 2 at the head. I could almost draw the outlines in the air. When they stepped out to call other relatives, I helped with the last gentle tasks. I fixed the pillow, tidied the table, folded the extra blanket. The room felt like a place after a party. Quiet, but full of what had just happened. On my way back to the desk, I peeked into the other rooms again. 418, empty. 420, empty. 422, empty. The unit wasn't just calm, it was hollow. That's when the puzzle pieces finally slid together, not with a snap, but with a soft click like a door closing. What if the family I saw wasn't late? What if they weren't even alive? They were well dressed in a way that didn't match the chilly Sunday I was living in. Their faces were calm in a way grieving people rarely are. They didn't ask questions, didn't check phones, didn't fumble with tissues or coats. They didn't need anything from me. Not directions, not updates, not permission. They only needed time. Exactly 15 minutes of it, from 2:41 to 2:56, right up to 3 o'clock. And then they were gone. I didn't tell the daughter and son what I'd seen. It wasn't mine to give, and maybe they wouldn't have wanted it. When families are breaking, you don't hand them a mystery. You hand them water and a chair and a quiet moment with their person. But later, when the room was empty and clean and I was finishing my charting, I wrote something I'd never written before. Not in the official notes. Those stay crisp and clinical. In a small line notebook I keep in my pocket for lists and reminders, I wrote, 2:41, well-dressed family present. 2:58, peaceful passing. 3 o'clock, time called. Real family arrived after. Then I closed the notebook and sat very still and listened to the wing breathe. Since that day, I answer call lights the same way, turn patients the same way, fold blankets the same way. Work is work, but when a room feels like it's holding its breath, I look around a little more carefully. If I have to move my cart around a space that looks empty, I still say, "Excuse me," under my breath. And sometimes when I smooth a sheet and check a clock and feel that soft change in the air, I say one more quiet thing that no one taught me in training. Thank you for coming, because maybe that's the real mercy of 4 West. Not the machines, not the medicines, not even the gentle hands. Maybe the mercy is that no one leaves alone. Not really. Maybe, just out of the corner of our eyes, the room fills with good coats and polished shoes and lilac gloves, and someone who once loved them says the only words that matter at the very end. We're here. The first thing I noticed about the dining hall wasn't the food or the tables. It was the floor. It was new with laid over old concrete, but when you walked across the middle, the sound was different, hollow, like there was a big, empty space underneath. Plates rattled more there. Coffee cups trembled if you set them down too fast. I didn't think much of it on my first week at Maple Crest Assisted Living. I just learned where the extra forks were, how to work the dish machine, and which residents liked extra butter on their toast. Only later did somebody tell me the truth. The dining hall sat on top of what used to be the indoor swimming pool. Before Maple Crest was an assisted living place, it was an old hotel. The kind with red carpet and a chandelier in the lobby and a pool that echoed with voices. Years ago, the owners filled the pool, built a floor over it, and turned that space into our dining room. The hotel rooms upstairs became resident rooms. The lobby became a community lounge. The old front desk turned into our nurse's station. If you squinted, you could still see hints of the hotel bones under everything. I worked the evening shift in the kitchen, 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. I wasn't medical staff. I passed out trays, wiped tables, ran plates, and kept coffee hot. It was quieter work than nursing, but it had its own rhythm and its own strange moments. The first time someone mentioned the pool, it was Mrs. Daly in room 312, which sat directly above the dining hall. She leaned over her tray and whispered, "Can you tell those children to stop running?" Her hands shook, but her eyes were firm and annoyed. "They're splashing again." I smiled and said as gently as I could, "We don't have children here at night. It's quiet hours." She looked past me, toward the wall, like she could see through it to another place. "Then who is laughing?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. After that, I started paying attention. Mr. Keene in room 314 asked me one morning, "Do you still make them wear shower caps?" I thought he was joking. He wasn't. "The lifeguard used to blow the whistle," he said, tapping the air with a finger. "No running by the deep end." Then he frowned at his eggs. I heard it last night. I told myself they were remembering the hotel days. Many of our residents had lived in town long enough to visit the old pool when they were younger. Maybe they were mixing the past with the present. That happens sometimes with age. I let it go, until the night the dish machine was off and I heard water. It was late, almost 10:30 p.m. I had rolled the racks through, washed the last spoons, and flipped the big green switch down. When that machine stops, the whole room relaxes. The hiss and roar fade, and you can hear the hum of the soda fridge and the tick of the wall clock again. I was stacking mugs when I heard it. A splash. Not a drip. Not a pipe tick. A splash like someone's hand slapping the surface of water. I froze. Another splash followed, closer to the middle of the room. Then the quick echo of water smacking tile. And then, faint but clear as day, a child's laugh. I walked out of the kitchen and into the dining hall. The lights were down a half. The tables were empty and wiped. The floor shone under the ceiling fixtures. There was no one there. But the sound came again, water moving, playful and wet, as if a body had cut through it. The hairs on my arms stood up. I stood on the hollow part of the floor and felt a coolness rise up from below, a breath of air that did not belong in a sealed room. I stayed very still until it stopped. It didn't fade away. It just ended, like someone had closed the door. The next day, I asked Ortiz, our maintenance guy, about it. He had keys to everything and a memory for the building that beat any file. He wiped his hands on a rag and said, "You hear it too?" I blinked. Too. He nodded toward the hall. Rooms over the dining hall complain sometimes. Kids running, water splashing, lifeguard whistle. We get calls. We go up. No water leaks. Nothing. I tell them it's old pipes and day memories bumping into night. Is it old pipes? I asked. He looked at me for a second, then sighed. "Come on," he said. "I'll show you something." We took the service elevator down to the basement. It didn't look like much. Concrete hallways, storage cages, shelves of paper towels, and boxes of plastic cups. We walked to a locked door I had never noticed. Ortiz let us in. The air changed right away. It was cooler. He flicked on a bare bulb. The space under the dining hall wasn't fully filled like I'd pictured. It was a shell, a big rectangle with rough concrete walls where the pool had been. Half the depth had been filled with rubble years ago, then capped with a slab. You could still see the old mosaic tile of the deep end on the far wall, pale blue and white. A rusted drain cover sat crooked, halfway buried. "It used to be all open," Ortiz said, voice soft in the echo. "They poured fill and sealed it to make the floor for the dining room. But not all the way. There's air down here. Space." I stepped closer to the mosaic. It wasn't pretty anymore, but it was clear, little squares and fading colors, a wavy line like water. I touched the wall. It felt cool, even in the summer. Ortiz pointed up. "Hear that?" I listened. Feet. A slow roll of a cart. That was just the kitchen above us. But underneath that, so faint I thought I imagined it at first, I heard the shape of sound I knew, the wobble and slap of water against tile. "It's not water," Ortiz said quickly, as if to cut my thought off. "You're hearing the building. Air and ducts. Sound getting caught and bouncing. It's a weird box. That's all." We left. He locked the door. But my mind had already turned a corner it couldn't turn back from. After that, the reports picked up. Maybe I heard more because I was listening. Ms. Avery in 316 called down on the night phone. "There are children singing. It's so late. Can't you move them?" Well, I went up with tea. She sat in her chair with her hands folded. "You hear it?" she asked as I stepped inside. At first, I heard nothing. Then a small chorus of voices drifted through the floorboards, light, far away, like kids making up a song. It was happy, not mean. It should have made me smile. It made me cold. Mr. Wade banged his cane on his ceiling, our floor, one morning and told me, "Tell the lifeguard to blow the whistle again." They don't listen if he doesn't. I asked him what the lifeguard looked like. He frowned. Red shorts, sunscreen on his nose. Everyone knew him. You must know him. He worked here for years. Mr. Wade moved into Maple Crest only 6 months ago. The hotel pool had been closed for more than a decade. Sometimes the timing was strange. On nights when the dining hall sat empty, when even our TV was off, the sound of water would start around 1:15 a.m. and stop around 1:37. Not every night, but often enough that I started checking the wall clock without meaning to. On some nights, it was laughing and splashing. On others, it was softer, like slow laps and a gentle kick, the kind that makes a smooth rhythm. Twice, I heard the sharp tweet of a whistle and the low echo of a voice I couldn't make out, like a warning carried through a gym. We tried to find a normal reason. We looked for water lines that could hammer at night. Ortiz checked the dish machine drain and the soda fountain. He even shut the main off at midnight once, just to see. The sound came anyway. In the morning he shrugged and said, "Old buildings talk." I believed him, but I also believed our residents. One afternoon, I took trays up to 315, 317, and 319. All three residents told me the same thing in different words. Kids were playing Marco Polo, said one. Somebody jumped from the side when they shouldn't, said another. I heard a wave, like the water went over the edge, said the third. And she made a little motion with her hand, like a crest rolling under her palm. None of them knew the others had said it. None of them heard each other's rooms, but they all lived stacked above the dining hall. I try to picture the old hotel in its busy days. The pool under bright lights, the wet slap of flip-flops on tile, the lifeguard's chair, the big window at one side where light would pour in from outside when the sun set early in winter. I try to imagine how sound would have moved. Kids yelling cannonball and parents saying no running and the whistle cutting through it all. The building had soaked up those sounds for decades. Maybe some part of it was still playing them back. Then there was the night of the wet footprints. It was close to midnight. I had mopped, set the chairs, and propped open the kitchen door to carry a tub of napkins to the supply closet on the far side of the dining hall. I walked straight down the center, right over the hollow spot. That was when I saw them, shapes on the floor. Not puddles, not spills, just dark marks that stretched from the kitchen threshold toward the far wall. They were the size and shape of small feet, close together, some pointed forward, some turned sideways like someone pivoted and stopped. I put the tub down and crouched. They weren't wet. My finger came up dry. They were only darker, like the wood had been pressed by something cool and left a print. As I watched, the last one faded a little, as if a breath of warm air moved across it. I stood and slowly looked across the room. It was empty. The air conditioner wasn't even blowing. I listened the way you listen when you think you might be in a dream. Nothing. No water. No laugh. Just a clock ticking away the last minutes of the shift. When I told Ortiz the next day, he frowned more than usual. Humidity does strange things to finish, he said. Then he rubbed his jaw. But we keep it pretty even in there. Could prints show without being wet? I asked. In theory, he said, and then he nodded toward his key ring. You want to see the underspace again? We went back. The air under the dining hall was colder than before, almost like fall had arrived early. He shone his flashlight across the partial fill and onto the far wall. The mosaic looked the same, but when he moved the beam lower, it pushed into a dark arch in the corner I hadn't noticed, like a little tunnel blocked off by stacked cement blocks. There, a metal ladder went up and disappeared into the slab, sealed and useless. Ortiz tapped the block. That's where the pool filter room was, he said. There's a void behind here, but it's closed. Any way to open it? I asked. He shook his head, not without tearing apart half the dining hall. We stood in silence. Somewhere above us, a chair scraped. In another part of the building, a door thumped softly. The empty space took those small noises and gave them echo shirts to wear. I tried to imagine what the room had sounded like when it was full of water. That week, the sound seemed stronger. I wasn't the only one who heard them. The night nurse, Elena, came to the kitchen for ice and stopped in the doorway, eyes narrowing. You hear it? She asked. Hear what? She tilted her head. A faint ripple of splashing came up through the floor. Kids, she said. I used to swim there when it was the hotel. The ceiling used to drip in winter. My brother got scolded for running. Same whistle. She looked down at her shoes. I never told anyone that. Why not? She shrugged. You want to keep your job? You don't tell ghost stories to families. We didn't, but the families told us their own. A granddaughter visiting 317 one Sunday afternoon brought in a photo album. She showed her grandmother a picture of a little boy in striped trunks beside a pool with blue tile. The old woman's eyes brightened. I remember, she said, touching the photo with a shaky finger. We came here in the summer. Do you hear them at night? The granddaughter laughed, thought she meant neighbors. I kept wiping tables and said nothing. Days passed, then weeks. I got used to the schedule of it. Some nights nothing, some nights a whole hour of soft churning like the water was never still. Twice, I heard a voice count, 1, 2, 3 jump, and a splash that followed too fast for any real child. Once at 2:03 a.m., I smelled a sharp, clean chlorine scent that made my nose sting. It vanished before I could decide if it was real. Not everything was gentle. There were nights when the sound came hard and heavy, like someone was swimming laps, turning and pushing off the wall, turning and pushing again, over and over, strong and serious. Those nights, the residents upstairs slept badly. In the morning, they were tired and cross. So much splashing, Mrs. Daly said, rubbing her forehead. How can children have so much energy at 3 in the morning? At 3:17 a.m. those nights, the heavy sound stopped. I know because I started writing down times on a scrap by the clock. Maybe the building had its own kind of pool hour. Maybe something else did. One night near the end of summer, we had a storm. Rain came hard, drumming on the windows, and thunder rolled across the hills. I was the only one left in the kitchen. Everyone else had gone home before the sky broke. The power flickered, but stayed on. I unplugged the coffee maker, just in case, and stood in the doorway of the dining hall, watching the rain fingers streak the glass. That was when I heard the whistle, so sharp and sudden that I jumped. It didn't echo like other times. It was clear, like it was blown right there beside me. The hair at my neck lifted. Then came the rush of water below, faster and louder than I'd ever heard it. It wasn't happy this time. It sounded like a wave rolling from one end to the other, heavy and strong, slapping the sides. A voice I couldn't make out shouted something I couldn't understand. Another splash. Another. Then the sound of a child giggling, high and fearless. I walked to the center of the room and stood over the hollow spot. The floor felt almost cool through my shoes, like the old pool was breathing up mist. Lightning flashed outside and lit the window white, and for a half second the glass over the serving line caught a reflection that didn't belong to the room. Light flickers moving like water and a dark, tall shape on a chair that wasn't there. Then the light faded and the reflection went back to my own face. I whispered, "No running," barely brave enough to give the air my voice. The whistle didn't answer, but the water's sound slowed as if a game had ended. The storm moved off, and the building settled back into its old bones. By 3:17 a.m., the hollow space under the floor felt still again. I didn't tell anyone about the reflection. I did tell Elena about the time, and she nodded. "It's the same for me," she said. 3:17. Like lights out. We never told families. We listened when residents complained about the noise and answered like always. "I'm sorry you were disturbed. We'll make sure it stays quiet tonight." We laid out extra blankets, offered tea, and lowered the TV in the lounge. We did the normal things you do when people are uncomfortable. We just did it with one ear turned toward the floor. And I changed one small habit. When I rolled my cart through the center of the dining room late at night, and that strange coolness rose from below, I moved a little to the side. It sounds silly, but I didn't want to walk right down the middle of a lane I couldn't see. We all have our ways of being polite. Sometimes I think about the hotel that used to be here, about birthday parties with paper hats and slippery kids taking turns on the diving board, about winter evenings when the windows fogged and snow pushed against the glass, about a lifeguard who reminded everyone to walk, not run, and to keep their heads above water. And I think about the residents upstairs, about old minds that mix time like cards in a deck, about memories that climb the stairs when the building goes quiet. Maybe they hear so clearly because they remember so well. Maybe they hear because the house knows their names. I can't prove anything. Ortiz has the keys and the answers that fit on forms. The blueprints say the pool is gone. The fill is solid. The slab is strong. The floor is safe. On paper, it's a dining room. But at night, when the dish machine sleeps and the hall clock ticks loud enough to measure your breathing, Maple Crest is also something else. It is a room built over a room that used to hold water. It is a place that learned the sound of joy and kept it. It is a floor that remembers the echo of a splash. If you ever visit after dark, step into the center and listen. If you hear the soft slap of water and a child's laugh that feels like summer, don't be afraid. Just step to the side, like I do, and leave the lane clear. And if you hear a whistle, take a breath and smile. It means somebody is still on duty. Every facility has a shift that nobody likes. At Maplewood Nursing Home, it was the 1 a.m. cleaning round. That was when the building felt empty, when most residents finally slept, and when the long dining room echoed too loudly with every push of a mop. I worked housekeeping back then. Nights mostly. My job was simple. Sweep, mop, wipe down tables, and make sure the hallway stayed clean. But it was during those quiet hours with my bucket squeaking and the smell of bleach in my nose that I began to notice him. The dining room was wide and lined with tall windows that turned black after sundown. The windows were like mirrors at night, catching every movement inside and throwing it back at you. If you didn't like your own reflection, you didn't look too long. I always started at the far end and worked my way to the doors, mop swishing back and forth. The overhead lights hummed. The clock ticked. That first night, I had just wrung out the mop and looked up to check my progress when I saw him in the glass. A man in a brown suit and bowler hat. He stood behind me in the reflection, just a few feet back, his face pale but clear, his mouth set in a hard, cruel line. I spun around so fast the mop clattered on the floor. The room was empty. Just me, the tables, and the steady drip of water from the mop head. I laughed nervously, told myself I was tired, and went back to work. But when I looked at the window again, he was still there. Same brown suit, same hat, same terrible expression. This time I didn't turn. I stared straight into the reflection, my heart hammering. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching, his eyes flat. Heavy looked through me. I dropped the mop and left the bucket where it was. I didn't even lock the supply closet. The next morning, I didn't tell anyone. Who wants to say they saw a man in a brown suit staring at them through the glass? But when I came back the following night, I couldn't stop glancing at the windows. And again, at 1 a.m., there he was. It happened the same way. I'd mop, catch his reflection, spin, and find nothing behind me. Except now, the longer I stared, the more detail I noticed. His suit wasn't crisp. It was worn, faded at the elbows. His hat cast a shadow over his eyes, but his mouth was always visible, curled into that awful half-smile, half-snarl. After a week, I broke and asked one of the aides about it. Ever seen anything strange here at night? I asked carefully. She set down her coffee, gave me a long look, and said, "You've seen him, haven't you?" I froze. Seen who? Her lips tightened. The man in the brown suit. You're not the first. That's when I learned the residents had been talking about him long before I got there. Mrs. Collins in room 108 said he came to her doorway at night and tipped his hat, his smile sharp as a knife. She rang the call bell every time, but staff always found the hall empty. Mr. Lawrence in room 112 told the nurses about the visitor in the brown coat who stood at the foot of his bed, whispering. He refused to repeat what the whispers were, only saying they're not kind. Even residents who could barely string a sentence together seemed to know him. One woman with advanced dementia would point at the corner and shriek, "Suit man, suit man," until staff had to move her to another room. The stories lined up. Always nighttime, always menacing, always the same brown suit. When I asked another co-worker, she leaned closer and said, "Some say he's an old owner of this place, back when it was a boarding house. Others say he's not connected to here at all. just something that likes nursing homes. He watches people who are close to the end. That chilled me more than anything. Because in my short months there, every resident who claimed to see him had died within a week. I started dreading the 1 a.m. rounds. I begged to switch shifts, but housekeeping was short-staffed. I couldn't refuse, so I made rules for myself. Don't look at the windows too long. Don't turn around if you see him. Don't let him know you've noticed. But one night, the rules broke themselves. It was late winter, snow tapping against the windows. I was mopping as fast as I could, eyes down, when I felt it, the weight of someone behind me. I froze. My skin crawled. Slowly, I lifted my eyes to the glass. He was closer this time, much closer. His reflection loomed just over my shoulder. I could see the shine of his hat brim, the wrinkle in his tie, the deep lines on his cheeks. His mouth was twisted wider, almost a grin. Against my own rule, I spun around. The dining room was empty, but the air was colder. I could see my breath cloud faintly. I backed toward the doors, mop dripping, heart hammering. Just as I reached for the handle, the light above me flickered. Once, twice, and then, through the corner of the window, I saw him lift his hand. Slowly, a small wave like goodbye. That was the last night I ever finished my round in the dining hall. After that, I refused. I cleaned early, before midnight, and left the floor as it was. If anyone noticed, they didn't complain. The residents, though, their stories didn't stop. One by one, those who saw him faded away. Always the same order. First, restless sleep. Then whispers about the brown suit man. Then panic. Then silence. When I left Maplewood a year later, I still carried his image in my mind. The pressed but worn suit. The cruel expression. The way he seemed to use the reflection to watch, as if he couldn't quite step fully into the room. Even now, when I mop late at night, in any building, I avoid looking too long into windows. I know what glass can show you if you give it the chance. And sometimes, when I catch my reflection moving just a split second slower than I do, I wonder if he's still standing there, waiting in the dark, hat tipped low, smile sharp as ever. Day shifts in assisted living homes are noisy. Families visit, TVs blare the news, residents call for help. But night shifts are different. After 9 p.m., the halls grow quiet, the air feels heavy, and every sound seems sharper. That's when the building shows you things you'd never notice in the daylight. I was on the night shift with another caregiver, working the east wing of the facility. That wing was almost all female residents, older women, many widowed, some with dementia, most asleep by 10. We kept our rounds light there, water refills, bathroom help, checking oxygen tanks. Easy compared to the other wings. At around 11:30 p.m., the unit was silent. My coworker and I were charting at the little desk when it happened. A voice rang out, "Help me, help me." It was so loud that both of us jumped to our feet. It was a man's voice, deep, strong, echoing through the hall. We looked at each other, eyes wide. No men lived in that wing. None. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Before I could answer, it came again. "Help me." The sound filled the hall, bouncing off the walls like it was shouted through a megaphone. We ran down the corridor, peeking into rooms, thinking maybe a TV had been left on. But every room was dark. Every woman was asleep, soft snores and steady breathing. No TVs, no radios, nothing. The voice boomed again, this time from behind us. "Help me." We spun around. The hallway was empty. We regrouped at the desk, both pale and shaken. I picked up the phone and called the nurse at the front. "Did anybody come down here? A visitor? Maintenance? Security?" She sounded confused. "No one." "What?" I swallowed. We heard a man yelling for help. Her voice dropped lower. "Oh, that must have been him. Him, I asked. The nurse sighed. The veteran. Haven't they told you? She explained. Years ago, before either of us worked there, a male resident lived in the East Wing. He was a World War II veteran suffering from severe PTSD in his old age. At night, he would hallucinate, sometimes crying, sometimes shouting for help. He'd yell so loudly that staff on other floors could hear him. They tried medication, calming routines, everything, but nothing worked. He lived out his final years in that same hallway, his cries for help becoming a kind of nightly ritual. And then one winter night, he died. His last words, according to the staff who sat with him, were the same as all the nights before, "Help me." Ever since, people said his voice still echoed through the East Wing. Always at night, always desperate. I wanted to doubt it. I wanted to blame pipes or ventilation carrying sound from somewhere else. But the voice had been too clear, too sharp, too human. My coworker was trembling. "I'm not going down there again alone," she muttered. So we made our next rounds together. At 1 a.m., just as we turned the corner by room 208, the shout came again. "Help me." This time it wasn't booming down the hall. It was right next to us, as if the man were standing between us, shouting into both our ears. We both staggered back, clutching our chests. The hall was empty. We rushed to room 208 anyway. Inside, the resident, a frail woman with Alzheimer's, was sitting upright in her bed, eyes wide. She pointed at the corner and whispered, "The soldier's here." My stomach dropped. By morning, when sunlight finally filled the wing, the building felt normal again. Families bustled in, nurses swapped reports, and the cries of the night seemed impossible. But the memory stayed with me, and it wasn't the last time. Over the next few months, we heard him again and again. Sometimes faint, like a whisper down the hall. Other times, so loud it rattled the charting desk. Always the same words, "Help me." The residents reacted too. A few said they saw a man walking in the hall at night, dressed in an old uniform, mumbling to himself. Others said he stood in their rooms, shaking his head, repeating the same plea. "Help me." One night, a new hire laughed when we told her the story. "Ghost soldier, sure. You guys just want to scare me." That shift, around midnight, she went alone to restock towels. She came back 10 minutes later, pale as paper. He screamed right next to me. She whispered, clutching the counter, right next to my ear. But when I turned, nobody was there. She never laughed about him again. We tried to piece it together. Maybe the veteran had lived so many nights reliving the battlefield that his voice had carved itself into the walls. Maybe his desperation had soaked into the plaster, ready to replay at random. Or maybe, just maybe, he was still here, crying out because in his mind the war never ended. Whatever the reason, his presence became part of the East Wing's rhythm. Staff stopped asking if we'd hear him and started asking when. The last time I heard him was the worst. It was around 3 a.m., the hour when the world feels thinner. I was alone at the desk, writing notes when the cry came again. "Help me." But this time, it didn't echo down the hall. It came from inside the desk area, right behind my chair. I froze, pins slipping from my hand. My breath turned shallow. Slowly, I turned around. No one. Just the wall, the clock, the supply card. But the air was icy cold, and I swear I felt a hand brush my shoulder. "Help me," the voice whispered. Not booming now, not echoing, just close. Personal. I bolted. I left the desk light on, papers scattered, and ran straight to the nurse's station at the front. I didn't care if they thought I was crazy. I wasn't sitting there alone anymore. Years later, I still think about him. The soldier who never left, who kept crying out in the only words his mind had left. I wonder if, in his way, he was calling not just for staff, but for anyone to understand the fear he couldn't escape. Because the truth is PTSD doesn't fade with age. It doesn't die when the body does. Sometimes it lingers, echoing through the halls of an assisted living home, long after the man who carried it is gone. And if you ever find yourself on a night shift, walking a quiet wing where no men live, and you hear a deep voice calling, "Help me," don't be surprised. It might just be the veteran still fighting his last battle in the dark.